in our house, we never throw away perfectly good food. We put it in little plastic containers and we put it back in the fridge. And then and you're ahead of me on this, right? Then we start buying new stuff and we put that in the fridge as well. And eventually we discover the good food's gone bad. And then we throw it out. And you feel good about that because it's now bad. And so that's the little rhythm there. I don't know what you do in your house with leftovers, but this I know about you. Every thought, every emotional reaction, hi Heather, hi Naomi, welcome Kate. Every emotional reaction you have to God, every belief you carry towards Him will determine the direction and the outcome of your life. It will even has the capacity to influence the generations that follow. And your view of church and where church fits into your life is also a big deal, because you can't separate your relationship with the bride and with Jesus. They go together. I could never have a really deep friendship with someone that didn't like my coral. Imagine inviting them for a meal and they said, well, is your wife going to be there? And I'd say, yeah. Oh, I'm not coming. I'm not that keen on your wife. You're a good bloke, right? Now, for those that know me, you understand that, right? That people would have a trouble with coral. It's usually me, actually. But it just doesn't work that way. What we believe, it really matters. Because all behaviour moves towards a goal. And whatever we believe will meet our deepest needs becomes our goal. We are continually, almost daily, setting little goals. We're not even aware of it, but we are continually, as human beings, as a species, setting goals and directing all our behaviour towards them. And in every response, everything we do is driven by what we believe, not by what we say we believe, right? But what we deep down truly, really, believe. And that comes from what you tell yourself, the life experiences you've had, how you interpret life stuff happening to you and how you internalise it. And that can be a problem, which is why God has gone to a lot of trouble to give us His word, like it's like a true north, something that we can set our life by that will take us through life and not get lost with belief systems that are flawed, that are broken. So therefore, it's really important how we read His word, how we understand that, how we interpret things, how we grow in our understanding and how we allow that to influence our life. Coral and I, a number of years ago, went to a wedding. This was his second wife, of one of our ex-youth kids. And it was a sad wedding in the sense that Coral and I were the only ones there. This was north of Newcastle and it's around Cessnock area. And we were the only ones from his past. None of his family were there. We were the only ones that he kept any connection with from the past. And he's marrying this girl and she's got a couple of kids and she's an atheist and he's a Christian. And it was a strange wedding. And sometime later, after the wedding, she rang me one night and she said, Lex, how do I find a Christian school for our girls to go to? And I almost burst out into laughter on the phone. I said, what do you want a Christian school for? You don't believe there's a God. And she told me how she got to that place. She said, when I was a little kid, I went to Sunday school. And the Sunday school teacher told us that if we had the faith of a mustard seed, we could say to the mountain, go jump into the sea, and would do it. So she said, I decided to try that out. So she said, I went outside one day as a little girl, I looked at the mountains and I said, mountain, move. It never moved. So she thought, maybe I should try something smaller. So she found a tree and she said, tree, move. And the tree didn't move. So then she found some grass, some long grass, and she said, grass, move. And the grass moved. But it's just the wind. And she said, that's when I came to realise that God was not real. God didn't exist. That what I was told was not true. But she said, I don't want my girls growing up handicapped by what I believe. So I want them to go to a Christian school. Our belief systems, as we grow in life, get more complicated than just a little girl coming to a belief that God is not real, that he doesn't exist, because the mountain, the tree and the grass didn't move. But I want to tell you the story this morning of two families. It's a very personal story, and it travels over 4 generations. And in a sense, what I'll tell you this morning is simplistic, because it's hard to take 4 generations of lives and put them into a little snapshot. And I might even have some of the detail wrong because it's my memories and it's my understandings. But the power of what I'm going to tell you is in the principle that when we do life how God designed it, and when we have the right belief systems towards him, it works. And when we get it wrong, it doesn't work. Because our beliefs impact so much on this relationship we have with him. It begins in 1929 in Maldon, little mining town, country Victoria. And my grandparents are taking on their first church they'd ever pastored, ever led. Their first little baby was born dead, but they had 3 other girls afterwards that. And my mum obviously was one of those. She was the middle daughter. When those 3 girls grew up, they all married Methodist ministers like their dad was. My grandparents were Methodist ministers. And so all my cousins on mum's side of the family were preachers' kids. And every one of my uncles and aunties served God faithfully their whole life. Mum and Dad had 5 children. Every one of those has served God faithfully in whatever capacity and giftings God's given us. 4 of those 5 have been in full-time ministry leading churches, different denominations. My sister's United Church minister here in Bairnsdale. And of the 12 biological grandkids that Mum and Dad have, half of them are in full-time ministry in churches around Australia. All of them love and serve God faithfully in whatever capacity they have. My auntie and her uncle, Mum's sister, had 7 kids, all preachers' kids, saw their parents grow up just as faithfully serving God as my mum and dad did. But of those 7 kids, there's probably 3 that have a relationship with God. In our family, there are no divorces. None, anywhere. In just that family of my cousins, about half of them are divorced and some have remarried and that's not worked, or just lived with someone. And most of the grandkids in that family are not going on with God. And it's got me. It's always got me. And I sat down with my mum one day. I said, "Mum, why? Help me understand. What's gone wrong?" And Mum said, "Well," and she reminded me that when I was about 18, 19, just starting going out with Coral, and they were leading the Uniting Church here in Bairnsdale, Mum and Dad encouraged us to go to a Pentecostal church in Bairnsdale on a Sunday night. It was a COC church. Because we had a hunger for more of God. At the same time, my cousins were growing up in Bendigo. And in their teenage years, my cousins, they also started to get this hunger for God, and they also wanted to go to a Pentecostal church. But my uncle and auntie shut them down because they were scared of things they didn't understand, and they believed that speaking in tongues was wrong, that those sorts of expressions of the Holy Spirit was wrong, and they shut them down. And as a result, my cousins' interest and growth in God just dropped away because they didn't have the Holy Spirit and power in their life to help them live, and they just drifted away. And the next generation's just gone in its relationship with God. What we believe really matters. What my uncle and auntie believed about the Holy Spirit had a very big impact on those 7 kids. Today, we're starting a new series called Why God? And it's a question. And each Sunday, it will be followed by why God, for example, do bad things happen to good people? Today, I'm calling this Why God Did You Leave Him There? And that's a question that we'll get to in a little bit. But I want you to come up with the questions, not me. I want to know what's deep down in you, what you think, because all of us somewhere get to a place in our walk with God where we go, why God? Because there's things we don't understand. And sometimes they become such a blockage in our relationship with God, we just shut down and we sort of pull back from God and we sort of withdraw. We still may function looking like a Christian, but some part of us shuts down, or some part of us can't come alive because we've got this blockage. And I'm not saying we're going to find every answer, but I want you to contribute. I want you to put down on paper a thought you would have that we can look at over the next few weeks. And all this began because someone sent me a text message with a question about the 2 thieves, the 2 criminals that died either side of Jesus on the cross. Someone sent me a question and they said, why did Jesus leave him there, the one that responded to him? Why did he leave him there? And then they said to me in this text, but there's more to this story, but I don't get it. I know there's more. help me understand, help me see, because I just know there's more to this story. And so that's what started this series. I want to read you a little fraction of the text message they sent me. They said this: if it's in the Bible, then surely God must want us to learn something from it. It's almost like a parable now for us, a tiny snippet of something significant hidden right there in plain sight amongst the enormity of Jesus' crucifixion. All four gospel narratives, the writers tell us about two thieves, two criminals being killed either side of Jesus. It wasn't just a thief, though. They weren't like little petty thieves, because Luke is the only narrative that tells us the complete story. And Luke also tells us about the Good Samaritan, that story. And the word that Luke uses for the robbers that attacked that Jewish traveller, bashed him to the point of nearly death. If he had died, they would have been murderers. They stole what he had. Those people sound like good people. If you look at the Greek word, what robbers means, it's like petty criminals. But these men that were put to death beside Jesus, Luke uses a completely different Greek word, and it means evildoers. It means worthless, depraved, wicked men, almost like they were unredeemable. These are hardened criminals. They're not just petty thieves. But here's the thing. Only Luke includes all the story, all the details that Matthew and Mark and John overlook. They don't tell us anything in this story. It's like it wasn't important to them when you looked at the big picture of the crucifixion and Jesus and all that. It's like they just left it out. And you probably have never had much of a look at it either. You probably have just went past it, as I have my whole life. I've never looked deep into this ever before till I got this question. And the story is found in Luke chapter 23, and it's an ugly scene. There's three men dying, impaled onto planks of wood, lifted up off the ground, and people are watching and mocking and entertained by the pain of what they're going through, and they're mocking Jesus. It's the most barbaric way you could design to kill someone. And Matthew tells us in great detail of all the things that people were saying to Jesus, mocking, and who was saying it. And he includes that it was actually both these hardened criminals that were mocking Jesus. Matthew doesn't include the fact that one of them changed. He does mention about the centurion that when Jesus died, he says, because of the way Jesus died, that man was truly the Son of God. Matthew says that. But John, who was the only disciple there, he doesn't tell us any of that. Doesn't tell us about the centurion, doesn't tell us about what one of the criminals said to Jesus, the change in him. None of it. And you know what I love about what I just said to you is that is because the Bible is so authentic. It's what should be there. In the four narratives of the crucifixion, we should see variations in the narratives because it's individual people telling us the story. It's through their eyes. It's what they pick up. When my brother and I go hunting, as we did the last couple of days, And we come back and I tell the story of how far it was, what I shot. And he tells a story, you'd think it was a different story. But it's not. It's just through my eyes, it was much further than he reckons his measuring thing tells you. It's true, Joel, isn't it? But see, that is human, but God takes the humanity and makes something supernatural, profound in the stories, and he makes sure that all the detail is included and is in there for a purpose. And as I've dug down into this narrative, I'm amazed at what's in this story, and there's no way I can get it all out this morning. So I'd really encourage you yourself to go and read through what Luke includes in Luke 23 and have a dig around for yourself and find out how God will speak to you in your area of life. And as I started to look into this, I realised that for most of my life, I have been wrong in what I remembered of the story. And what happened. I've got it wrong. I've believed all my life what isn't there. And all because someone asked a question, I went on a search and I found stuff that I didn't know. And at the end of this morning, during the last song, there's bits of paper that some of you will have received as you came in. I want you to write down a question for God. And we'll gather them. They're anonymous, anonymous, yes. And for those online, you can just send a message on Facebook to us. We'll get that, or my mobile number's there. You can text me. But we want you to contribute. Now, in this story in Luke 23, there's two parts to the story. And I probably won't get to the second part today. But the first part is what the criminal said to Jesus and why. And the second part is what Jesus said to the criminal and why. And we're going to read it. So if you can just put it up on the screen, thanks. Ta. One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. And this starts at verse 39. Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us. But the other criminal rebuked him. Don't you fear God, he said, since you are under the same sentence. We are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserved. Do you know, not a lot of criminals, you go to a few jails around Australia, not a lot of criminals will tell you we're getting what we deserve, right? They'll tell you that they're getting a tough end of it. But this man has done nothing wrong. Then he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus answered him, truly I tell you, today you'll be with me in paradise. What set up the change of heart in that criminal? Who began by mocking Jesus and ended up defending him. What brought about that change? He says to his mate, shut up. Don't you... Thanks, Coral. Don't you fear God? Don't you realise this is an innocent man? But believing that Jesus was innocent didn't change him. I believed from the very beginning that Lindy Chamberlain, you know, the dingo took my baby story, I believed she was innocent. But that never changed me. Just believing someone is innocent and wrongly accused and wrongly in jail or wrongly being, it doesn't change you. So what changed him? Well, Luke actually gives us the backstory. Luke gives us the information that if we actually have a dig into it, it's all there, and we can see what changed him. It was when this evil man had a first-hand revelation of who Jesus really was. And he saw him as prophet, priest, and king. And Luke tells us, Luke gives us the backstory that no one else gives us, so we can see what changed him. On the way to the place where they would put the crosses up and put these three men to death, they had to carry their own crosses. And on the way, Jesus stops, and the women are wailing and mourning for Jesus. And he says to them, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, weep for yourselves and for your children, for the time will come when," and he prophesies of the destruction of Jerusalem, which happens 40 years later. This criminal saw Jesus operating as a prophet. And then on the cross, Jesus says, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." You might have heard those words before, but only Luke records those words. And he tells us because that's what the criminal heard. The criminal saw Jesus acting as a priest, a mediator between man and God, and saying, "Forgive them." And then above Jesus' head is written King of the Jews. The authorities wanted it to be changed to, he reckoned he was King of the Jews. He said he was, but it was a statement, King of the Jews. But this criminal, because he had a revelation of who Jesus really was, saw way beyond that sign. Saw him as more than just the King of the Jews. He saw him as prophet, as priest, but not just king. And as he's looking at Jesus externally, Jesus is impaled on this cross. He's helpless. He can't get himself off. He has no power. And yet this man sees him as a king, and what he says, we're going to come to in a moment. But instead of mocking Jesus, he defends him. Now, Heather Sparius put up a little post on Facebook this week, and it was a quote from Elizabeth Elliot. And Elizabeth Elliot, in 1956, her husband was murdered by Auca Indians in Ecuador. Missionaries going in. 4 of them were all killed. And she later went back with her daughter and lived with them for 2 years, with the men that murdered her husband, and ministered to them. And she wrote this that Heather put up on Facebook. "The secret of joy is Christ in me, not me in a different set of circumstances." That criminal was still dying. He was still hanging on a cross, but now he's defending Jesus instead of mocking him. And the voice of the crowd is no longer going with the voice of the crowd. It has no hold on him, and he's free to be himself. And when you get a real revelation of who Jesus is, you become free to be yourself. Many, many people live fearful of being themselves, of the voice of the crowd, what other people will think. it holds us back. And when I was 16, I was really embarrassed about my dad being a minister. I don't know how Lauren coped with you, Dave, but I just, if people would ask me what my father did for a living, I would never tell them. I was embarrassed. I hated the fact that my dad was a preacher. And when I was 16, as Easter camp, and I really saw Jesus for the first time. And my response to him was to ask him to come into my life and I wanted to follow Jesus. And I can remember we walked out of this big Easter camp thing, and across the road, a little town called Warwick-Nabil, and we went into a little cafe, and my friends with me bought a few things, and just out of habit, I stole some Lifesavers and put them in my pocket and just walked down the street. And I'm walking along, and suddenly I've realised I've got these. So I can remember going back into the shop. I took them out of my pocket and I put them on the counter and said, I don't think I've paid for these. And then I ran, But something had changed in me. And then when I went back to school, I was in an art class at school, and I did an oil painting of Jesus hanging on the cross. And everyone in that art class in my year at school asked me why I did that. And I was no longer embarrassed. I wanted them to know. It was an outward expression of a change in here. And that's what happened for this man on the cross. He was changed. So what did he say? Because all my life, I've believed what he said, and it was wrong. So what did he say? He said this. Now, the verse that I read to you was from the NIV, and it said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. That's very accurate, except for one word, the word Jesus. In the original, it doesn't have the word Jesus, it has Lord. And that Greek word is really important because when he addressed Jesus, it wasn't familiarity. It's like, oh, Jesus, remember me. He says Lord, and that means supreme authority in the universe. It's the one who is in control. And that day on the outside, it didn't look like Jesus was in control. But that's how he saw him. What we believe, what we see about Jesus is a really big deal. And then he says, remember me. Don't forget me. God has this incredible capacity to forget by choice. He will forget our sin by choice. Forgiveness is blotting it out. He chooses to forget. We can't do that as human beings, but God can choose to forget. And there's going to come a day when God is going to choose to forget people that have ever lived and existed on planet Earth. He's going to choose to forget people. And in Matthew chapter 7, Jesus says, on that day, this is when he returns, he says, on that day, people will claim to be Jesus followers, and Jesus will tell them plainly, I never knew you, away from me. And they're going to be separated from God forever and forgotten. And this criminal says to Jesus, remember me. Don't forget me. When? And the word when is futuristic. It's a set time ahead. And then he says, when you come. And that word come can just as accurately be translated appear. When you appear. When in the future, in a set time and place, when you appear in your kingdom, remember me. That word kingdom is not heaven. That word kingdom in the Strong's Concordance means royal power, kingship, dominion, rule. And this is what it says next. Not to be confused with an actual kingdom, but rather the right or authority to rule over a kingdom. And then the Strong says this, of the royal power of Jesus, the triumphant Messiah. This criminal saw in Jesus, saw a future. Jesus is dying and he sees a future as supreme authority who will establish his kingdom. And he says, whatever you do, don't forget me. When that takes place, remember me. The question that I got asked about why didn't Jesus take him off the cross? Why didn't Jesus do a miracle and show people all the things he could do? That criminal never asked that. What he asked, Jesus gave him. He promised him. He said to him, I tell you the truth. Today, you'll be with me in paradise. I stopped where the comma is. But it can be argued very, very powerfully that the comma is in the right spot, in the wrong spot. If Jesus says to him, I tell you the truth today, you'll be with me in paradise, that is a completely different understanding. And we in our Western world have a belief, many people, that the moment you die, you go to be with Jesus in heaven if you're a Christian. And it's based on this one sentence. The rest of the Bible doesn't teach that. But we use it to give hope and comfort to people. I got a phone call this morning to say Craig Clark had died this morning. Kathy rang me. Right? Now, Craig's someone who's younger than me, played a very important role in my life. But we all die. We don't all die the same because we don't all live the same. And Jesus promising this man something in the future. And I have to go to it next week. I'm not going to keep going, but it's a really important thing to understand God's word accurately and not just assumptions. And the difference in this one sentence, where the comma is, there's been an argument over that since the 5th century. One of the most accurate manuscripts from the 4th century has a gap. And if you read it, I tell you the truth today, you'll be with me in paradise. Well, where's paradise? It's only a word that's used 3 times in the New Testament. It's not heaven. So where do we go when we die? Where did Jesus go in the 3 days before he was resurrected? He didn't go to heaven. And he didn't go to what we think of as hell, where there's punishment and suffering. So I'm going to look at that next week. But it's a really big deal that when we read God's word, we accurately find out what it's saying. So I don't know how I can wrap this up. So all I can say is we'll come back to it next week. To be continued. Thanks, Jesse. But I want you now to, can I get the band up? But I want you now to start to write down a question, multiple questions of something that's See, sometimes in church life we throw cliche answers at questions that we don't really have an answer for. And that is not helpful. And so, as the band plays this song, just if there's something that's bugged you, something that's just been a little sticking point, something that you've always wondered about, I want you to write that down so we can look at that over the next few weeks. It really is important, because there are children who have a parent die, and a well-meaning person says to them, oh, they've gone to be with Jesus because Jesus needed them more than we did. God took your mum and dad. God took your dad. God took your mum. And there are children growing up resenting God because an adult had a wrong theology. And so, for all of us, just if there's a question, if there's not, that's fine. I don't know where we're going to put them. Just put them on a table at the back there. When you finish, just put them in a heap on that table. And if there's someone else that needs any paper or pens, Pam and Vicky, you can combine your names if you like, yeah. Yeah, they've got some handouts. So just put your hand up if you haven't got a bit of paper and pen, and they'll give you one. Yeah. Thanks, Dave.